Iran and Cuba, two governments nearing their end or only wishful thinking? Our next guest says the fall of the two regimes could trigger the biggest geopolitical shift since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Historian Jared Knott is the author of Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, Book 2, The Many Mistakes That Changed the World. Jared, it's good to talk with you again. So why do you believe the effect of the collapse of the communist government in Cuba and the Republic of Iran would be similar in global significance as the fall of the Soviet Union?
Issues that we're facing here in the United States with our election of a socialist mayor in New York and with what's happening across the globe is which kind of government, which kind of economy is best for the people. And you can look at how socialism has worked out in Cuba, if they're in utter collapse, and how well it's worked out in Venezuela. At one point 25 years ago, they were the wealthiest country in all of Latin America, and basically under a free enterprise type system. They turned to socialism. Of course, Cuba for years has been turning to socialism. Both have just been utter, unspeakable disasters. On top of that, we have the situation in Iran. Just a year and a half ago, they were on the verge of having a nuclear weapon. They were a terrorist country spreading terrorism throughout the Middle East and throughout the world. And with the idea of them having a nuclear weapon, a terrorist organization having a nuclear weapon was nightmarish. Now they're in near collapse. Cuba is just economically has collapsed. Of course, Venezuela, we've decapitated it with this narco-terrorist leader. So a lot of progress has been made in the right direction. Have to add quickly, the work is not done. Huge amount of work still in front of the administration, but major strides have been made.
Well, I reported on the collapse of the USSR under Ronald Reagan, and I was also in Berlin and witnessed the collapse of the Berlin Wall. But that was a result of Mikhail Gorbachev's policy of glasnost and perestroika, allowing a greater amount of freedom in his country. In Iran, the Ayatollah leadership is cracking down, even killing their people right now.
Yeah. Yes, going back to the collapse of the Soviet Union, the only thing keeping the other states there, including Ukraine and the others, the Baltic states, in alignment with the Soviet Union was there was a gun to the head of the people. You started in Hungary in 1955, and in Poland, whenever the people tried to rise up to break away from the Soviet Union, there'd be a huge military force come in and crack down and kill a lot of people and force them back into compliance. Once Gorbachev, to his great credit, take a more enlightened view. We're not going to put a gun to the head of the people to force them to stay in the Soviet Union. Once that gun was taken away from their head, they were in the streets by the hundreds of thousands demanding independence. And the Soviet Union just collapsed completely, no longer exists. We have Russia, of course, but we don't have a Soviet Union. We have Mr. Putin, who wants very much to put his mark on history by rebuilding the Soviet Union, which I don't think is going to be possible. But that's a whole ugly chapter of history that ended up going the right way. Basically, you call it the collapse of socialism and proving that once again socialism doesn't work. I go down to, it seems like we have to learn it every generation. You look at Venezuela and Cuba, see that it doesn't work now anymore better than it did 30 years ago. A different situation with Iran. The terrorist regimes are failing, and that is very good for the people in the world who want to have freedom, election, free enterprise, prosperity, hospitals, schools, bridges, as opposed to war and terrorist activity.
Well, I think a lot of the parallels may be between Reagan and what he did and Bush, what he did against the Soviets, and today with Trump, sanctions and taking economic measures to strangle them economically. That really seems to be making a difference. But what parallels do you see with other historic events?
Well, the history, because it does not have one continuous flow in one direction. It'll be heading one direction, sometimes take a right turn to the right or turn to the left. You go back to the American Revolution, that was a major turn away from being dominated, one country being dominated by another. That was certainly a major turn in the right direction. I guess you could even count, somebody would even count the Alamo and Texas winning its independence, because that opened up manifest destiny. Some people say it was a bad thing, but I think it's a good thing. This idea from sea to shining sea, an American country dominating, stretching from the Atlantic to the Pacific. That was you call that a turning point. The defeat of Germany in World War I and certainly in World War II. That was it was something of a close call. That was a major turning point in history. The collapse of the Soviet Union, of course, being another we just mentioned. And then now with the collapse, or near collapse of Cuba, and with the decapitation of the narco-terrorists in Venezuela. And just a year and a half ago, again, we had a terrorist organization, as I mentioned, close to getting the nuclear weapons. Can you imagine a worse nightmare than terrorists having a nuclear weapon? We were very close to that. Now that's been washed down the drain, and we're going in a completely different direction. That could be considered a major turning point also. And I will point out that usually in history, fortunately, that democracies have a tendency to win over totalitarian interests or totalitarian regimes. That's not always true, but generally speaking, democracy is winning slowly, carefully. Sometimes it's difficult to do, very difficult to do, but democracy seems to be winning and have for these last 250 years.
Okay, so we may be on the verge of something big here. Historian Jared Knott, author of Tiny Blunders, Big Disasters, Book 2, The Many Mistakes That Changed the World. Thank you, Jared. We appreciate you being with us.